go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. I'm Elena Campbell with the Rochester Regional Chamber of Commerce. It's my pleasure to welcome you this morning to the third in our four-part series, Rebooting Your Business in Safe Mode. And I have to give great props and kudos to Brad Lambert, our presenter, because every week when he puts together his slideshow, things change. And as we all know, things changed again last week. So we're so excited to hear from him today. And our other presenting sponsor, Matthew Vizana with CCS Presentation Systems. Thank you again for joining us and partnering with us on this series of calls. We appreciate you.
Happy to be a part. Thanks.
So as always, I want to start out with just a couple of announcements. Our Foodpreneur group, for those of you who are part of that group, are going to meet virtually this Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. We will talk about the different ways that our food businesses are navigating what's going on, and also talk about the latest developments and announcements from the governor last week and how we can help each other navigate that. Our weekly member update conference call, again, will be on Wednesday at noon. This week's sponsor is Rochester University, and we will hear from Dr. Brian Stogner, the president there, about Rochester University's plans for the fall, how they are changing their delivery of education and their services, what their on-campus housing is going to look like, and get some insights from him as to what's going on in the world of higher education. So we're excited about that. We will also, as always, get updates from our mayors, Mayor Barnett, Mayor Bixson, our DDA Director, Christy Trevero, and then any representatives of our elected officials, Congresswoman Slotkin, Senator Peters has someone on the call usually, Representative Weber, and our State Senator Mallory McMorrow's office. So these have been extremely helpful updates every week so that we can hear what's going on at each level, all the way from our local level, all the way up to the national level with our US senators and congresswomen. So that is Wednesday at noon. And then I asked Maggie, our amazing vice president, if she would talk a little bit about a couple of our events. And I have the virtual New Member Connect up here on the board right now.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Memorial Day weekend passed. I hope everybody had a great time. So our first new virtual event that we're going to roll out is we've taken our New Member Connect and flipped it into a virtual event. If any of you have attended our last coffee talk, we are using our breakout rooms. So we'll be using our breakout rooms for this event also. This event is dedicated to our new members. It's a way for them to get to know our staff and our ambassadors. So, excuse me, if you've been a new member within the past 6 months, please email me and I will get you on the registration list. And then you will receive the Zoom information after I register you. That event will be held this coming Thursday at 9 a.m. Our other new event that I'm really excited about, and we've gotten a lot of traction on, is the Back and Better Than Ever campaign. Michelle Eberly and I have worked very hard on this, and people are starting to pick up on it. So it focuses on promoting area businesses that have established new safety procedures following social distancing guidelines and are ready to celebrate their reopening. The Chamber will provide necessary material to participate and share your great news on social media, increasing your exposure and visibility to the community members. All you have to do is email me and I will send you all this stuff all the information on this. There's a couple files. How it works, you contact me and say, we're back, we're ready to open. And the chamber staff or volunteer, which will be me, will drop off 2 pieces of ribbon and a yard sign that we're having. And then I'll take a picture of you guys with your new sign. Then when you're ready to reopen your doors safely, we'll have you and your staff stand outside your establishment and tie the ribbon together and post it to our social media and your social media and take a Facebook Live video of it. Then after you do that, the chamber will take that video and post it everywhere on our social media. The cost for this is $40 for chamber members and $50 for non-members. So if you're interested, please let me know. I think that's it, Elena.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maggie, for sharing that. We appreciate it. We're really excited about this, about tying the community back together. And I think our community, I think, is excited as well to know who's going to be opening and when and what their new hours will be and what their protocols will be to assure everyone that we're opening, our businesses are opening safely, and we can start to get back to supporting our local businesses, which is critical. As we all know, during this time, I just saw something come through on Facebook about a business that is deciding to permanently close. And it's sad. Of course, none of us like to see that. And so anything that we can do to help support our local businesses, that's what we're gonna do. We wanna make sure we don't see any more posts like that. So please reach out to us as well if you have anything that you need, anything that the chamber can do to help you. Please let us know. We are here. The other thing that I wanted to mention is our board of directors last Tuesday approved the formation of a small business task force. So this is going to be chaired by 3 of our board members, Pamela Valentic, who's with the Rochester Hills Economic Development Department, Marilyn Trent, who is our vice chair and the owner of Trent Creative, who also is very involved with the DBA in downtown Rochester, and Marie Ortell, who is one of our ambassadors, our past ambassador chair. They are going to be our 3 co-chairs of this task force. And what we are going to be looking at is how the chamber needs to change. What do we need to do differently now? What do our priorities need to be? What do the member benefits need to be? How do those things need to change to serve you, our businesses, in this new environment and the new environment that we know is going to continue, I guess. The chamber board will be redoing our strategic plan. Our 5-year strategic plan ends in 2020, this year, that we developed 5 years ago. So this August, we will be developing a new 5-year plan. So this task force is going to be critical in helping us determine what does that 5-year plan need to look like? What do the goals and priorities of the chamber need to be so that we are supporting you, our businesses? So we're really excited about the task force and stay tuned for more information about that. So with that, we're going to get into it. I am so excited to introduce our illustrious speaker, Brad Lambert, attorney at law, local attorney, member of our chamber, who stepped up to the plate when we put out the call that we needed help in navigating some of these executive orders and things that are happening. And we just appreciate you so much, Brad, and all of the time and effort that you've put into this. And I will stop sharing my screen so that you can take it away, Brad.
Okay, well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Much appreciated here. And I'm going to boot up my presentation and we'll get right to the start. There we go. I hope everybody had a wonderful weekend. I really appreciate you attending our presentation today. And we'll get right into it. But first, I'm going to let you know that This presentation will be available on my LinkedIn page and soon thereafter on our webpage when our webmaster gets it loaded up. And I know that Elena has been putting our presentation and other materials on the chamber page as well. So this will be available, and if you still can't find it, by all means, feel free to email me at the email indicated here, and I'll be happy to send that and any other materials you're looking for as well that relate to this COVID-19 pandemic that we're all dealing with. We're going to move to the next slide, and these are the categories that we have already addressed, and we won't be touching much upon them today. The first three were our first week. We touched upon those, and then the criticality of having a preparedness and response plan, which Elena alluded to for the chamber. Everybody's got to have one now. It's necessary, and the normal limitations where you have to have 10 employees or you have to be in certain SICs for OSHA and other requirements like that to apply, don't apply. Everybody needs to have one. I know the state of Michigan has put one up on their site. I can send you to that if you like. I'm not really fond of their form because it looks like it's got a lot of reporting requirements there that certainly for my clients, I would rather not see them having to get into because it kind of ties you down. But nonetheless, it's available there for use, and I have one as well that I can make available and have made available on the websites I mentioned. Today's topics are going to be operational controls. We're moving away from getting started, even though a lot of us still aren't started, but we're getting more into operations. More and more businesses are opening, so we're going to deal with the staging requirements and the operating requirements that have been kicking in here in the last couple rounds of orders, which I've noticed a certain sliding effect here to in the governor's orders where she's getting into this more and more as opposed to just who's open and who's closed. And certainly, I'd encourage you, particularly for next week's presentation, anybody has had any new experience they've had and you want to either share that experience with me or have questions that I would address next week. Certainly, this is a new experience for a lot of us. Like I mentioned, most of us are not subject to OSHA to all that great a degree, and now suddenly we are to that kind of concerns. We're also going to be talking about the very critical reporting requirements, customer objections, and of course, employee compliance concerns, which are always front and center in this particular presentation. And yes, we have made it into the 100s. We burst through 100 here on the governor's orders. That's an incredible number, but we're there, and I suspect these numbers that we're referring to are going to change probably by next week. We'll be into more of that. We have 5 distinct EOs that really impact us. 4 of them are listed here. The one that is not is EO 76, which deals with some of the unemployment concerns, and we'll touch on that briefly. The OSHA guidance you see there is a little less prominent now, I've noticed. She's, in her executive order, she's getting away from the OSHA guidance and more into just some specifics that she's providing and more into just CDC guidelines with respect to social distancing. It's a bit of a change. But nonetheless, it can have some significance, particularly when we're talking about the amount of distance you have to keep from your other employees and, of course, customers, suppliers, others who may be entering your facility. And I really expect that the legacy of these orders that she's issuing is going to be in the OSHA requirements. Sooner or later, we're all going to be opening. And frankly, what I'm seeing in these executive orders where the shift is more and more to your in-house, your in-operation standards, I'm seeing more of an indication that we are approaching the end game, believe it or not. I know it's hard to believe. It seems like we've been locked in here forever, but we're getting there, folks. Our next slide, these are the specific requirements that apply to restaurants and bars. So for those of you operating restaurants and bars, this is, and there's going to be a lot of similarity across the board. But here with restaurants and bars, she's just gone to a 50% capacity. So whatever you knew your capacity to be prior to the pandemic times, until the orders are rescinded or modified, you're down to 50% once you're allowed to open. And I expect that's going to be rather soon. All the different signages and notices that are required are going to be out there. The ground markings, sort of like what Elena did with her board there on the lawn. Those sort of things you're going to need to have, and of course, we're very familiar seeing them going into stores as well. Your staging requirements are going to be very specific in terms of keeping people away. And my concern, not only for restaurants, but also for offices and businesses, is you got to be careful about the choke points. Essentially, you're going to have a person, probably you, the owner of the business, who's going to be operating much in the manner of a movie director and moving people around, whether you're using cars to call people in or whether you're having them line up outside or a combination of both. You have to be careful about the fact that when they move to, let's say in a restaurant, for example, the actual desk where the maitre d' is going to send you back to the tables, that you don't have a log jam there, because that's not going to be looked upon very well by the authorities. The good news for restaurants and bars so far, we have not seen any indication that there's going to be any customer tracking required. That, I know that's been a bit of a hobby horse that's been kicked around out there in some of the news reports, but so far I've seen nothing on having to actually track people who have been infected or have shown infection when you're a restaurant or a bar. That was coming, and it may still be coming, but right now it's not there. And of course, you're going to have certain protocols that are required to respond to any incident or outbreak which takes place on your premises. Now, for more of us who are getting open, the retail requirements are very much on our mind. The capacity limits, you can see on the slide, 4 customers per 1,000 square feet. That does not include employees. And then it's sort of a suggestion, you know, with a little heft to it. You need to have 2 hours for quote unquote vulnerable populations. So if you can set aside a couple hours where they're the focus of your retail operations, then you need to do that. But it is a little bit of a slippery slope. I haven't seen where it's absolutely mandated. Perhaps a particular outfit or a retail outfit doesn't have a lot of vulnerable population business. So that one is a little bit shaky and not exactly a bright line here for us to deal with. The HHS, the state's HHS, Health and Human Services, can vary these orders. So now we have to keep an eye on what they're doing. Because again, I sense a pass-off going on here. The governor is passing more and more of these kind of restrictions off to the people who deal with them on a regular basis. It's just that their plate's going to be a lot more full now because they're dealing with a lot more operations than they ordinarily do, as I mentioned before. The typical signs and notices requirements that you've seen, I haven't seen a lot of changes here. But so you're going to be pretty used to it. And the one change I have seen is we are going to a more updated CDC type of guidance. This has to do more with surfaces. As everybody's aware, the CDC came out and said, oops, our bad. I guess surfaces aren't as communicable as we thought they were. But I haven't seen a lot of change on that other than the governor saying, okay, we're going to go with a more, she doesn't say it, but she essentially gets rid of the reference back to the March guidance. And you can now use the more updated guidance with respect to your signs, your notices, and more importantly, your cleaning protocols. The signs are supposed to say what it says on the bullet points. Wear a face mask and don't enter if you're ill, showing symptoms. Your staging requirements are much the same that you've seen before. You have to facilitate and encourage social distancing. It all goes back to the 6 feet. And essentially, I think your point of reference should be, at least mine is, the grocery store clerk. The closer a particular employee is to the grocery store clerk in terms of closeness to customers and frequency of contact, the more a barrier or a face mask even is indicated for that particular employee. And it's notable, I guess, again, this is one of those items that only a lawyer can love. She dropped the 3 feet, which is more for everybody. In other words, her basic terms have been 6 feet. If you have frequent contact within 6 feet, then you have to wear the mask. If you have frequent contact within 3 feet, then you need a barrier or you need the actual face shield. Here for retail, the governor is saying, no, it's 6 feet. She's dropped the 3 feet. So if you have a lot of frequent contact, and again, I go back to the grocery store clerk, then you need to have the barrier or the face mask for that particular employee. Again, they enhanced cleaning and sanitizing protocol. The employee training is going to be essential, particularly with respect to your reporting requirements, which I'll cover a little bit later. And naturally, you do need to respond to any incident and outbreak, including the rather, it's rather been put out there in passing. You're supposed to report any incident or outbreak on your premises to the local public health authorities, whoever they may be. And you'll have to get familiar with that. Office requirements are going to sound a lot like what we just would with retail. Screening is still in effect for employees, and that's true of retail and restaurants as well. I didn't mean to overlook that on the other two. Your staging and notices, very similar, but now we've gotten into something called shared spaces concept, as if I didn't have enough to deal with, and all of us didn't have enough to deal with respect to contact points and everything else. Now we've got something called shared spaces. And I'm going to have to read on this because she essentially said, in the order, restrooms and hallways are mentioned as shared spaces. So there you go. There's your example of what is meant by a shared space. I would also say if there's a community copier that everybody works off of, that everybody's computer sends the printing to, that could very well be considered a shared space, especially in the office environment. Don't share office equipment to the extent you can. Now here's one that she kind of went by the CDC and said you have to require the workstation wipe down twice a day. Doesn't say when, but as long as you're wiping down at some point twice per day, apparently once the office is open, or if the office is open, that's what you should be doing. And another requirement that kind of popped in there is, and it's funny, this one really isn't in the other two that we're mentioning, non-essential visitors. Now, we can all guess who non-essential visitors might be, but we're really just guessing because no real guidance is provided. My guess would be if all of a sudden a family member just wants to come by and visit us, I guess that would be somebody who's not essential, even though we're dealing then with the fact that I can be in close contact with my own family members. So that one, if you've got any questions on it, I'm happy to try to help you out on it, because we really don't know who a non-essential visitor might be that can't show up. And as I touched on before, the same thing, you need to respond to the incident or an outbreak of COVID-19 on your premises. Now, customer compliance can be kind of a tricky business, and it's interesting the distinction she's made between employees and customers. As I'll cover in the next slide, your requirements as an employer or owner of a business are far more extensive for employees than they are for customers. As we all know, everybody's had discussions about this, and opinions and attitudes about these restrictions go all the way across the board. You've got all the way from, this is ridiculous, we should all be out, we should all be, none of this should be going on, look at the death rate is so low, et cetera, et cetera. You go all the way from that end of the spectrum, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, where people are saying, oh, I can't believe she's letting people out already. This is so dangerous, and you've got all points in between. And as business owners and professionals and everybody else, we've got to deal with this. This is the new reality. You've got attitudes all the way across the board, and you're going to be dealing with this with your customers. My advice on this, so this leads up to the fact that you may have some customers walking in there and saying, I am not wearing a mask. I've even heard of businesses that said that, you can't wear a mask in my business. In that case, then you've got to deal with it, and I would suggest to have a consistent policy and be ready for it as best you can. Warn and then proceed is probably the best bet. You're not required to oust somebody who refuses to wear a mask or observe the other protocols that have been put in place. All you can do is have the notices, the signs, and then try to have them comply as best you can. You should at least make one pass. It is not your job to try to force this person to wear a mask. That's not the requirement. As the governor's orders are written, apply to the individuals. Each individual has to take responsibility for wearing the mask, not you as the business owner who has this person entering into the premises. Your only real option if you're uncomfortable with this, and again, this is taking the temperature of your customer and your supplier base. If you feel like this is going to be undermining your ability to stay open or attract customers, then you do have the option to exclude people who aren't going to comply with social distancing or wearing a mask or any of the other requirements as they are still out there. That's your primary goal, your primary measure for taking care of it. I suppose if you were a restaurant or an office, you could probably isolate somebody and you could put them in a corner when they're not wearing a mask. That's another possibility. Really, some creativity is going to be required there. You are not required to test customer health, I think it's a good idea if you can do it. Matt's going to have more on that. He's been a nice resource for me on ways you can do that. You can literally have phone notifications with customers as they're coming in, getting their consent to using equipment such as what Matt's going to introduce, to take their temperature, to do some testing, but you need to have some kind of consent. You're not typically under HIPAA per se when a customer is entering the space, but there's still privacy concerns, and your best bet is to stay away from taking customer temperature or any other thing without some form of consent, whether it's just from a sign, but more preferable, whether it's from some kind of sign off from the customer as and when they're entering, even if, and particularly in an appointment, you could just have it part of the appointment. If you're seeing them by appointment, have it built in there. Hey, yes, I can use Matt's equipment to take your temperature. And of course, you have to take care of again, the same thing I said before, you have to take care of your HIPAA concerns. You got to keep their privacy. Now, liability waivers, I'm hearing a lot about these. Everybody wants a liability waiver. I know they do it for real estate showings, and we've adapted those for that. I think for customers, they're effective. If you're really nervous about the fact that customers are coming in and you're going to get claims based upon COVID-19, I think legally you can do it with customers and others. Keep in mind that infection cases are notoriously difficult to prove. Because, as I've mentioned before, the first thing that's going to come up in the deposition is, okay, in that 14-day period, where else were you? You were in my space, but where else were you? And it's very difficult to prove an infection case, but it can be done. And particularly if, as we've all seen, certain sites all of a sudden have an outbreak. You have half a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen people who got whatever infection it was from a particular site, then you have a problem. So you can have liability waivers, but don't go overboard with them because, again, it is a tough case. It's a very tough case. Now, for employees, the focus shifts a little bit. I do recommend having at least part of your response and preparedness plan in your handbook as an addition or as a supplement to it. It's just a good idea for practice, and you can excise it if and when we don't need these anymore. I'm a little less enthusiastic about employee waivers and hold harmless agreements. For the main reason is workers' comp. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if the employee gets a infection from your site, chances are pretty good they're going to be covered by workers' comp. So the waiver, first of all, is not really even permitted under workers' comp with respect to injuries and other events that are covered by workers' comp. And you have a host of other laws that could also be adversely impacted, and rights that, and particularly the rights that the employees have under those statutes. So it's important to, frankly, I don't recommend it. If you really feel you need to do it, then be careful out there because employee waivers it's a very tricky business, especially with workers' comp. However, with the cautious objector, I think you can be a little more aggressive here than you might feel. We still have EO 36 in place. It has not been replaced. It has not been updated. Essentially and I call these employees the cautious objectors, the one who just don't want to come back to work for whatever reason, but mostly because they're afraid of being infected. Well, the cautious objector is protected if in fact they have, and again I have to go off of explicit wording here, a particular risk of infecting others. So it's mostly the people who would show up on the screening and who would honestly be able to say in the screening form that yes, I've had the exposure on one of these 3 different items that I'm answering. Those folks can probably go home. And obviously we all know the game. There is certainly a big opportunity here for an employee just to falsely mark one of those, yes, because they are a cautious objector to coming into work. You have the ability and the right to probe into this a little bit. I wouldn't go too far. But you certainly have, if it's just a matter of, oh yeah, I brushed by my cousin who then turned out to have COVID-19 a week later. Well, in that case, a brush by, what I call incidental contact, the authorities do not, that's really not qualified under even the terms that the governor is using for being able to stay at home or be a quote unquote particular risk of infecting others. When in doubt, I'm sorry. Hope nobody got dizzy there. When in doubt, get a waiver, make a specific offer to, excuse me, not a waiver, but make a specific offer to return to work. And make it in writing, because that way you're going to have a record, and record keep is going to be essential here, that the employee turned down an offer to work. And as you see here, Mushin has indicated that if somebody turns down an offer to work, they're not going to be eligible for the federal element of the unemployment benefits. And the state also has a similar rule, EO 76 out there, executive order, which I'm not going to get into detail today, but I'm happy to, if people are interested in it for a future presentation, I'm happy to do that. EO 76 has some specific guidelines as well, which would apply to this situation as to how the state authorities would react with respect to that element of the unemployment. And eventually we're going to get into return to work regulations for employees that have to come back. I'm not going to touch on that much today. Yes, I've kept this slide. You probably recognize this. Those who were here last week, you probably recognize this from last week. And no, this is not the person you think it is. I'm concerned for all of us with respect to the army of Red Queens that is going to be out there when these regulations hit, because in my mind, the OSHA compliance part of these regulations are going to have some legacy to them. They're going to have some legs, and they're eventually going to get converted into regulations as opposed to executive orders and be out there for all of us to have to deal with. And my concern is that a lot of these terms are vague. Social distancing, keep 6 feet as long as you can. I mean, what does all this mean? And the potential for after the fact rulings is dramatic. When you're at an inspection, when all of a sudden that dreaded knock on the door comes and here comes the inspector in from the Michigan OSHA, really you need to push back a little bit if they're pushing too hard. I wouldn't push hard. But you need to kind of stand your ground and say, you know, that wasn't in the regs. I didn't see anything in the regs or the executive order that said I got to do whatever you say I've got to do, such as telling a customer to leave. The regs don't say you have to tell a customer to leave right now. But all of a sudden, an after fact ruling, well, you should have been doing that. Well, that's not what you said. You're going to have a lot of that kind of back and forth here, and I see a lot of potential for that when we're getting into the weeds the way we are. Record keeping is your best defense. Keep the records that you're required to keep. I've listed them here on the screen that you have to do. Make sure you're keeping that closely. Keep any records that you feel that you can keep without going overboard, because that's going to help. And keep in mind who's enforcing these regulations. The police deal with the opening and closing, whether you should be open and closing. That's the police's thing. And frankly, it's not really in their wheelhouse. It's not their best thing, but I'm not saying they won't enforce it. It's just not what they're used to enforcing. But the OSHA requirements, yeah, these regulators, they're very used to dealing with this. And that is their wheelhouse. They're going to be out there. And your best defense is to have your response plan in place, be able to produce it when it's asked for. And you're already way ahead of the game if you can do that. You're way behind the game, and you're automatic for a violation if you can't. So having the records and having the preparedness plan ready for inspection is one of your key defenses when they do come calling. And yes, they're not going to come calling all the time, and it's going to be a little bit like getting audited by the IRS. It doesn't happen for everybody, but it's going to happen. It can happen, and you need to be ready for this if and when it comes. None of us know just how extensive the enforcement regimen is going to be once this thing starts opening up and we don't have the close orders anymore. Moving along. And in the next week, and perhaps after, depending upon what Elena would like to do, these are the items we're going to be dealing with. We're certainly going to have ongoing developments. We've seen that already. We'll deal with what's got to be employee files a little more, and of course HIPAA, along with dealing with workers' comp and employee legal claims. And I hope, thank God, I can get into the expiration of these requirements so that we can all get back to work. A little bit about our firm. As you can see, I do employment law. This is me pictured with my son, Dan. That's the two attorneys of our firm in our offices. We handle these areas that I've listed. I've been in practice since '82. We've been in Rochester for a year and a half, although I've lived here since 1980. And we're happy to be of service on this. And I appreciate you all listening to me on this, and look forward to getting through this series next week. And hopefully we won't have too much to talk about after that, because we'll all be back to work. And I do provide the authorities, so you can have some references there as well for what I've been talking about. And Elena, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much, Brad. We really appreciate it. We do have a couple of questions in the chat box. So one of them, what kind of PPE for customers at restaurants and bars?
Masks. I have not seen anything for, that indicates that the customer has to have a face shield or even a barrier. For example, I dread seeing it. I hope the day never comes where you have to have literally a barrier across the table between people. That I've seen nothing on that. So really, masks, you can make them available. But as I mentioned before, that's on them. They're supposed to be entering with a mask. Her order literally says, when you leave the house, you've got to be prepared to have a mask on as a customer or supplier, whoever you are, when you enter a public space. And I would certainly consider most spaces in a restaurant to be a public space. Perhaps the cooking area or some of the storage areas are not, but certainly the restaurant seating area would be.
Okay, thank you. And another question. I am a boutique fitness studio, which is still mandated to be closed. I do have retail products and body scans that I sell. Can I make appointments with my members, not the public, and sell merchandise?
Yeah, the reference to appointments is interesting, because I noticed in her previous order she went to appointments, and that would have been a disaster for her, by the way. That would have been a complete disaster. You could have made 100 appointments and had 100 people in your store. So she obviously got wise to that and went back to the 4-person per 1,000 square feet. So if you have retail operations, my understanding of the order, it's going to get a little trickier when you got a mixed bag like you're talking about, but you have retail operations. To my mind, you can certainly help your customers, your members, whoever it might be, in line and in compliance with the retail aspects of the opening that I've mentioned that's been allowed by the governor.
Okay, thank you.
Does that sound like an answer, or is more detail?
Well, I think like everybody, we're all trying to navigate what this means. I was on a call this morning, and I know there are some downtown businesses, not Rochester, but another community, where businesses are going to be reopening and everyone has an appointment.
Yeah.
They're able to control these are smaller businesses. They're able to control, the number of people that are in the space at one time. They've got their PRP in place. So they are making appointments, and their customers can come in. So
yeah, there's nothing barring appointments. I just found it, from my perspective, interesting that she switched off appointments and went to the 4 persons per 1,000 square feet.
I'm glad you said that, because here's a question that just came up. I am confused. Are we limited to 10 customers, or is it 4 per 1,000 square feet?
4 per 1,000 square feet. That's the standard she set. And that does not include your employees, which I also find interesting. I mean, if you're an employment intensive office or a retail operation, excuse me, you can have as many people in there as you like, as long as it's only 4 customers. It's 4 customers per 1,000 square feet.
Right. And I'm sorry, I think I maybe referenced 10, and I was confusing that with the ability to have 10 people get together now.
Yeah. Literally, you could read the order. If you have to have 11 employees in your 1,000 square foot space to operate, as long as you're maintaining social distancing, I guess you can have 15. That's how I read it. Now, that'd be an unusual situation. Most places wouldn't have that many employees, but that technically would be in compliance. I wouldn't push that button if I had the chance to, because she also has in there the general standard that you're supposed to keep people at home to the greatest extent possible. So maybe all those 11 employees don't have to be there. So you got a lot of weighing to do.
Right. Are there, as of when? Everything seems to be changing real time.
Tell me about it.
So that was so the 4 per 1,000 square feet, was that in the order last Thursday?
Yes.
So that changed as of last Thursday.
Yeah, the week before it was appointments, and I was all gung-ho on that one. I was ready to unload on that one. That would have been, like I said, that would have been disastrous for her.
Right. So there you go. Hopefully that question was answered. I don't see any others. Oh, what are the requirements for shared spaces, such as hallways, restrooms, and copiers?
There are no specific requirements. I'm going to go back to that one a little bit here. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick. It's mostly just social distancing. So, and this is the part I think people have gotten really confused about, is the standard is not that you have to stay 6 feet away at all times. Everybody seems to believe, and that's even included in an enclosed space. Everybody, that's kind of making its way into the lexicon, if you will, and it's not the case. I use the term incidental contact. Incidental contact is okay. You pass somebody in the hall, that's fine. You pass somebody going in and out of the restroom, that's fine. If you stand there and talk, face to face this close for about 3 minutes, yeah, you got a problem. You can't have that going on. But you certainly, as long as you're maintaining social distancing, the fact that you passed by somebody or had incidental contact within 6 feet is not a violation. You don't have to send anybody home.
Right. Another question, and you maybe answered this in a previous webinar, but what if an employee refuses to come back to work due to fear of getting the virus?
Okay. I've coined the term cautious objector to that particular kind of employee. And I turn your attention to the slide that I think it was the employee slide, number 9. Where we deal with that. And my concern with that particular employee is that they either don't show up, or they do not accurately answer questions 1 through 3 and say, yeah, oh yeah, because that's the game. I mean, you just say, hey, I was exposed, I get to go home, I don't have to show up. Those are the ones I'm concerned about. And Nushin in particular has made it very clear that somebody who's got an offer to work, and this is where I'm emphasizing that you should have a written offer put out there, and they have no valid excuse, they can't legitimately answer 1 through 3 on the screening test, yes, that person has to show up. So that person literally is subject to discipline if in fact they can't make the case that they have had the the dreaded or the unlimited exposure to somebody with the COVID-19.
Now, what happens if they can work remotely?
Well, that order is still in place. The governor's orders are still reflecting what I call like an omnibus principle or an overall principle, where you are supposed to still have people work remotely to the greatest extent possible.
Okay. Another question. Are there any stipulations on fitting rooms in retail stores? Some states have mandated that they stay closed. It is my understanding that we do not have any guidance.
I don't think we do. I think I have not seen, that's an interesting question. I did not see anything specific as to actually a fitting room, which is always the problem. The deeper somebody like Governor Whitmer gets into the weeds, the more weeds grow, and you really got to deal with these kind of details. And shared spaces, and the reason I'm hesitating is because I did see that certain areas have to be closed, and certain shared space. Oh yeah, that's what it came to. She said you had to close conference rooms, which I'm just mystified by that, because it seems to me that the typical office could use a conference room to enhance social distancing. There could be a lot of uses for this, but I did not see in the retail section where that was ordered with respect to a shared space. You just have to limit the exposure on that. And I'm a little bit, to me, if it was me coming from that perspective, I'd be much quicker to close a fitting room than a conference room, which again, it could be used quite handily for social distancing.
Right.
So I've seen nothing. I cannot recall, as I sit here, seeing anything closing a shared space such as a fitting room. And frankly, it's not shared from the get-go, because it's one at a time.
Right. I know that
kind of like a restroom.
I was on a Michigan Retailers Association call last week, and I know they talked about the trying on of clothes. And Macy's and Nordstrom's had came out and said they were going to, once the clothes had been tried on, they would be hung somewhere for 72 hours because that was the length of time they determined then that would be safe, that the virus would be dead on the clothes, and then they could recirculate it back out to the racks. I talked to another retailer who was on the call, said what they were going to do, they have a steamer. They steam their clothes when they come in because they're wrinkled from being in boxes and what have you. And so they were going to steam the clothing after each person tried them on, was going to be how they were going to handle that.
Yeah, both those measures sound sensible to me. Obviously, I'm not going to get into how Macy's ought to be handling things. But it seems to me that the recent CDC guidance pretty much takes away the whole 3 days on surfaces guidance that we've had since March.
Right. And for small retailers, clothing retailers, they wouldn't be able to have something off the rack for 72 hours. They just don't have the volume, to be able to afford to do that. So I thought steaming it was a good option, but you're right. According to what we're reading now from CDC, that's not such a concern anymore.
No, they've really downgraded that, and it's actually, it actually is reflected partially in the governor's order, where she's no longer referring to the March guidance. So there actually is some reflection of that there.
Right.
I still say following CDC.
Right. Are masks required?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all right. Another one. Are masks required if employees in an office are 6 feet apart?
If they're in a quote unquote public space. So if it's a typical employee, and I'll give you an example of the bank I went to, where we went to the banker, and essentially the banker was requiring us to stay at least 6 feet away from him. And he was not wearing a mask. And I think if you can maintain that kind of etiquette, where you don't have you have not converted the office into a quote unquote public space, which is the term of art that's being applied, then I would say the employee does not have to wear a mask during those times when his or her office is not a public space. Now, this obviously changes when you have 3 or 4 people continually walking through the office for some function. But if it's the classic, I've got my office, and I only have maybe 1 or 2 visitors a day that actually come in, particularly now where people just aren't getting out, then I would say no, that employee does not have to wear a mask.
Okay. Someone says handheld UV light scanners can kill very quickly. There's a tip. One other question, if an employee working remotely refuses to come back to the office, can they be required to return to the office, to return the office computer and continue to work, but then use a personal computer instead? The employer needs the work computer back to continue operations.
Okay, this sounds pretty specific. This really, to my mind, is raises concerns that are not just unique to the COVID-19 pandemic we find ourselves in. I would say whatever rules were applicable, I would generally expect whatever rules were applicable to the employee's use of that machine would apply here. Now, if the concern is that the employee is concerned about being exposed by bringing back the computer, I think that can be handled very simply. You know, if you really want to go to the ultimate, set the computer out on the landing at, you know, a certain time. I'll come out and pick it up. I mean, that to me would be perfectly okay. So if that's the concern, the COVID-19 concern, I would say that really shouldn't be able to be a reason for not bringing back the computer. But I got to say there's a limit to my answer here because I'm not familiar with the terms under which the employee got the computer in the first place. Unfortunately, I got to give a bit of a disclaimer there.
Okay. I think that's all the questions. Are there any more questions that anybody has for Brad? As always, we've covered a lot.
Indeed.
So thank you so much, Brad. And I know Brad will still be on the line with us. So I'm going to turn it over to Matthew Zana from CCS Presentation Systems. Take it away, Matt.
Thanks, Elena. Let me just share a screen here. It says one participant can share at a time.
Oh, I should have made you. Oh, Brad, did you unshare your screen?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
You did.
Yeah.
And
Oh, there we go.
oh, there you go. Just probably took a second.
Mm-hmm. So just a little about CCS. Since 1991, we've worked in the commercial audiovisual integration field. What do we do? Everything from equipment sales, which is what a lot of people think about, but we also do design and engineering of systems, full integration, and then of course service and training. And we do that throughout the country. So yes, on partner calls, we're hearing about all of the different states' rules and requirements and the crazy things that are happening in other parts of the country too. So we try and bring those pieces back as we talk about technology with our clients. And then I think, as Brad has indicated, having your plan, making sure that you've assessed all areas of your facility, talking about choke points earlier, employee entrances, do you need to have separate guest entrances, and then technology applications that would support what needs to happen in those areas. The ones that we are getting asked about daily, and our days have expanded to answering emails up till 9 o'clock at night, you know, around temperature check tablets. Number of different manufacturers that we carry now. We've got 4 different manufacturers. The 2 that seem to be resonating with clients are the Tori no-touch temperature scan tablets. So you can take a scan within 1 second, anywhere from 1.5 to 3 feet away to process people through those entry points. You can tie those into secondary monitors so you can keep that scan information private if you have concerns from a privacy standpoint with any of that information. You can also tie these in from a network standpoint, so you can have multiple locations all being monitored remotely. And here's another example, our Good View scanner, and those will start at about an 8-inch tablet. And they can go all the way up to a 21-inch tablet, and then through another manufacturer, Samsung, to a 47-inch tablet in more of a kiosk style. These can all be set up to also do digital signage as well. So if you need to communicate messages in certain entry points or areas to clients. So why invest in these? I think probably the biggest thing is the communication and what you're sharing with your employees. Is we're taking all possible steps to ensure the safest environment here. So it's kind of that first line of defense. You're mitigating risk for the business itself in showing that you're taking that extra layer. And for some industries, in one of the specific laws or executive orders, it calls out specific industries off the top of the head, construction and manufacturing, where they are required to have a scan. and they need to document and retain that scan information. So, make sure that you consult with those corporate counsels and your attorneys as to what makes the most sense for your facility, but seem to be putting them into a lot of different industries. This came up in a conversation with Brad last week offline, and we were talking about communicating and how do we grab permissions from visitors or from our employees. So we do not sell these devices. We actually instituted, if you look to the left of the screen there, a QR code, and we've automated our daily screening questionnaire. So our employees, before they enter the door at our lobby, they'll scan their code, and then it would send an email after they answered the specific questions if they passed or if they failed, and that stores it electronically. So you don't have to have a separate set of pens that everybody's touching to fill out and then retaining all of the physical forms. This is one way to do it electronically. Off to the right there, this was a capture, one of the emails that we got, Verizon Business. They have a subsidiary, a company that they're using, and it's a pretty detailed application. So the one on the left was a free app through a construction company online tools that we use called Field Tools. And then the one to the right is a paid application. And this particular one is being repped by the Verizon Business reps. I'm sure there's a myriad of other ones out there. So if you do want to take that into a more digital format for your facility, there are applications out there. I just thought that I would share. And then to Brad's comment about closed conference rooms, which the rest of our partners throughout the country found somewhat odd. They don't seem to have the same restrictions. So some of our manufacturers now have come to the table, and we'll call them rapid deployment collaboration systems. So within offices, we still need to conduct those Zoom calls, team calls, conference type calls, and it may not be feasible to individually set one up in everyone's offices. So these can be rolled to different areas of the facility, have still that one-touch lunch capabilities with a Microsoft Teams or a Zoom room setup. So these are additional things that manufacturers are responding to with all these continual cascade of executive orders throughout the country. If there are any questions, and then I'll just put up my contact details, we're happy to do a individual consultation. We can do that remotely. We can do it with a Zoom call or a FaceTime as you walk through your facility, and we can make recommendations for any areas that you think may be a problem. In one of our previous slides, I talked about camera systems and how companies are redeploying those to make sure that they're able to monitor for proper distancing, both with employees and with customers. So a lot of technology applications that can be overlaid to your businesses to support all of those safety protocols that you have in place. Please let me know if we can help.
Thank you so much, Matthew. We appreciate it. We appreciate you co-sponsoring this webinar series and helping our businesses as well navigate what they need to do and providing resources that can be very useful. So we appreciate you very much. I wanted to make a couple of notes. I put in the chat box for anyone interested a link for the Small Business Association of Michigan. They have some great resources on their site, and they have a great PRP template that you can utilize. So you can take a look at that. And also I put the link to our website, the COVID-19 tab page that we've set up. That is where you can find all of these recordings along with the slides that Brad has provided and any other resources as well. So those are available there. So we'll get this one up within the next probably 24 hours. It takes a little bit before we get the recording from Zoom, and then we do a little bit of editing to clean it up, and then we'll get it up there as soon as we can. I also wanted to let people know that our state representative, Mike Weber, has introduced a piece of legislation that would permit outdoor drinking districts. So in an effort to help particularly our bars and restaurants, because we know that many of them cannot survive on 50% capacity, they do need to have outdoor seating available to them, and many are doing that. But then, of course, the concern is the liquor laws, and we know that our bars and restaurants, that's a significant amount of their income. So he has introduced legislation to create these outdoor drinking districts or social districts where people of legal drinking age can walk around in public with an alcoholic beverage as long as they remain within the boundaries of the districts. I also spoke to someone from the Liquor Control Commission, Brad Jacobson, who used to be my state representative, is now a hearing commissioner with Liquor Control, and they have also relaxed some of their rules so that restaurants, as long as they have a fenced in contiguous space, they can serve liquor within that space. So as we know, for a lot of restaurants, depending on where you're located, you may not have any outdoor space that you can use. But if you could create a pathway, so to speak, to an outdoor space, then you could serve alcohol there. So it's positive that there are a lot of, I think, things happening to help our businesses navigate these times and allow them to be able to do things they normally wouldn't be able to do, that are things that are going to help them survive through this. So State Representative Mike Weber, if you're interested in seeing that legislation pass, you may want to contact your elected officials in the State House and in the State Senate to support that. So let's see if there are any other questions. I don't see any. Maggie posted a note. If you're interested in attending the virtual New Member Connect this Thursday or participating in the Back and Better program, make sure you email her. She'll be on that. And with that, we're going to sign off. Once again, thank you so much to Brad Lambert and Lambert Law and Matthew Vizano with CCS Presentation Systems for sponsoring these calls and presenting extremely valuable information to our members and our businesses. This has just been critical. Like I've said on every call, we are all in this together, and together as a community, we will get through it. And we are here at the Chamber to help all businesses, whether you are a member of our Chamber or not. We are a resource, and we are here to help all of our businesses. So thank you very much, everybody. And Brad and I will talk about, next week will be the 4th in our 4-part series. We'll see what this week brings, won't we, Brad?
Yeah, indeed. Stay tuned for further developments, yes.
And if it looks like there's, still going to be significant changes, we will extend the series. Don't worry, we won't leave you high and dry. We will be here to continue to guide you through this. So with that, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And it's sunny out. Let's try and get outside and enjoy a little bit of that sunshine.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.